Today on Business Journey Unlocked, I'm joined with Mohammed Shehzad, Managing Director of Atriod, a physical and electronic security consulting firm founded in 2006. Mohammed works closely with security directors, facility managers, risk officers across airports, corporate headquarters, government facilities, pharmaceutical plants, financial institutions, navigating one of the most complex decisions organizations face, which is how to design physical security systems that mitigate both risk, vendor lock-in, or operational friction. Mohammed, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto the show. I'm going to shoot it over to you to explain what you're all about.
Oh, thank you for having me. I mean, it seems like I'm pretty busy to a lot from that description. But yeah, that's kind of how, what we are. We provide a lot of security consulting expertise and experience in the areas of design and risk assessments and threat assessments, managing projects, providing professional services and client advocacy. So it encompasses a pretty broad swath of security, physical security, electronic security, operational security elements for a pretty diverse market portfolio, as you kind of alluded to.
Mm.
So we work largely in commercial spaces, higher ed, K through 12, corporate finance, and as well as healthcare and pharmaceutical. So that's been a journey. And actually, today is March 9th. March 6th was our 20-year anniversary.
Oh,
So
God bless.
as Atriot. So
God bless. So within the market, when you first founded it 20 years ago, was there something within the market that you saw that wasn't as beneficial? And given your skills, your expertise, your network, was there something that you saw that you were able to kind of pin down and kind of hone in your skills on?
yeah, so back then when I started, we were mostly a design firm. So we were
Mm.
providing security system design. So not so much on the operational consulting side or professional services side. And, I came from a technology consulting background. So the firm that I worked for before did all of technology consulting. So I had a lot more diverse experience in terms of not just physical security, but the infrastructure components behind it and how other elements such as IT, network architecture, cabling infrastructure kind of all came together. And, where kind of my skills were honed in that organization was sort of a very high level of project management,
Mhm.
program management, attention to detail. That was sort of their philosophy. That was sort of their concept, a very high touch user experience. So that's kind of what I brought on the table. And that was sort of my success. And, the end users that we were working with kind of really appreciated that level of engagement, that level of interaction and iterative approach to even design work. And that's kind of how it started. So when I went on my own, that was sort of the brand and message that we were promoting as what we brought to the table, for example. So that experience of a sort of a diverse technical knowledge and as well as that program management centric philosophy from that company kind of helped me kickstart.
It's interesting that you went from design to then consulting. There's a lot of other security companies that do the opposite. They start with the consulting aspect, then they go into the design, right?
Mhm.
Is it based on the experience you had at previous organizations? Did you feel your strengths kinda lied more on the design, and over time, you saw that you can be beneficial towards a consultant aspect? Because especially in security, biggest things that people do, it's a very slow process to get into. It's a lot of rapport building, it's a lot of fragmented workflows in their back-end system. So with the consulting aspect, I'm just curious, like, how you were able to convert, and when did you convert? Because as I mentioned, people kinda do the opposite.
Yeah, that's an interesting and a good question. So for I think the sort of the segue in it was that I tend to think in very strategic long term planning
Mm.
aspect. So that's how I like to approach. Even when I was doing designs, it was not just design of a specific building and facility at the time. It was okay. What does this translate to 5 years from now? How does this translate to your program? And a lot of designers, this is not unique to me. A lot of designers think that way, but that was an area that as I started to kind of do more and more work in, um, I started to like it. I started to enjoy it. That's kind of where my, personality naturally went to solve long-term problems. So when that started to happen, we started to help customers with, okay, we're designing this building, but what does the global standardization framework look like? What does the 5-year master plan looks like? And then from there, the natural segue is, well, what are the risks we're trying to achieve, mitigate? What pain points do we have operationally speaking? So it started to become more and more about than just a building, but their operation, their organization, their policies and procedures. So that's how it's naturally started. So it was like, okay, now we're doing some little bit of long-term planning. Now we're doing master planning. Hey, now we are doing some operational consulting. So can you help me with this? And can you help me with this? Part of that iterative, high touch approach helped because they were like, you're so engaged in this process. So, our company was always very engaged in solving the problem and not just designing it on paper. So, with that, but along with it, sort of my interest in solving the long term enterprise ecosystem type problem for the customer operationally speaking. And even before this, when I was, I haven't been an engineer in a while, but when I was an engineer before I started doing security, my thought process always was around process and operational problem solving. So while yes, I was doing technical design, that's kind of how I approached it. So it came very natural. So then it became a natural fit and an extension. And then we hired people accordingly that had that experience, that had that expertise to come in and start helping with that. And that's kind of how that grew.
That's beautiful, and it really shows that even when you first started the business in the design tech implementation side, over time you kind of fell into the consulting aspect. It's just very hard for a lot of businesses when they start out as they continue to grow. When should I push to continue what I'm doing? When should I pivot? Right? There's
Right.
so many different factors, so many
Yeah.
different opportunities that you can get into. But it's good that you found your calling. That's
Yeah.
the biggest thing. I'm one to be very focused on your strengths. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that say focus on your weaknesses, but if you focus on your weaknesses, you're not really gonna go far within the business and it's just gonna crumble. Hire people that you can facilitate your weaknesses to, and you can focus and hone in on your strength, which is your part doing the consulting aspect.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah. I mean, I kind of think you're right. You don't want to focus. You want to be aware of them. You want to compensate for them. But that's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah.
Correct, correct. Within your organization, obviously shortcuts are tempting, especially in the security consulting world, talking about vendors push key turnkey systems, clients wanting fast answers, fast solutions, fast approaches, but you position your business as not only unbiased, but a product independent client advocacy. Based on that, like given what you've seen, even though it may cost time, money, when the deals are a little harder to close, what do you personally witness that you have within yourself, within your workflow, within your personal discipline that allows you to not facilitate those shortcuts, but make it more for the client to make it seem like it's more beneficial to them instead of just going for like the shortest, cheapest, consultant or shortest, cheapest, design build?
Yeah, I think it's, about how um what we are going to do is actually going to help and add value. So if it's consulting for consultant's sake, is consulting's sake, right? If I'm just going to come in and give them a cookie cutter report or just, do some standard assessment and it doesn't add value, then that shortcut is not going to be valuable to them.
Mhm.
It's not going to be valuable to me because of one and done. Right. They'll be like, okay, yeah, these guys did this work and now we have something that we don't know what to do with. So, how you kind of avoid that temptation is by looking at the entire problem and looking at the entire solution for that problem. And if that requires a certain level of patience, a certain level of due diligence, an organized approach to it, it always does. And that's how we communicate to the end, to our end customers or to partners or whoever we're working with, even vendors downstream when we're working on projects. That's kind of the lens we take. That yes, we can do some quick things that are quick wins and quick success stories, but in the long run, you want to plan and organize, and you want to be patient with it. Not to the point of that now you're not just delivering anything, but there's a reasonable and a responsible timeline. And I found that if you communicate that upfront and you kind of elaborate that and explain as to what that approach would be and what would they get in each milestone of that process. What would be the takeaway for them? What would be the action item that they can actually go to their leaderships or to their management or to their teams to be able to implement? It's actually a pretty easy adoption and pretty easy adaptability on their part. It's not something they're looking to just do quick and dirty and just give me something that now I cannot use. So if you explain that and you
Right.
kind of, narrate it in that way, we have very little pushback on that.
I agree on your perspective about just being patient with your clients and potential prospects because there's so many people, especially in the security world, especially with SaaS companies in the security world. They try to push these cookie cutter products, softwares, but they forget the underlying experience, which is like, what exactly does the business need? Right.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, even though security is the systems that a lot of companies use are maybe outdated, fragmented, manual, there's some pinholes in the organization. You shouldn't go into being like, "This is what I have. It's $5,000." You should go
Mhm.
into every business, given what you do, like, truly understanding
Right.
what the business is all about. What exactly could you benefit and add value to? Not just like, what could they add value to you?
Right.
Because if you think like that aspect, what's gonna happen? They're not gonna go with you. But if they really truly see that they can truly benefit within your consulting experiences and the experiences that you have within your team as well, then they're gonna do it. I mean, a lot of people at the end of the day think that if I have great services and a great offer, people are gonna come to me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you strip down the services, if you strip down the company egos, names, statuses, what's left? People. People connect with people. People buy from people at the end of the day. So if you don't have those interpersonal attributes to actually connect with people, understand like a true discovery, right? Understanding what exactly they need and facilitating on that aspect instead of doing everything at once, a classic land and expand deal, then that's going to be more long term, more worthwhile for you. And it's going to be a higher rate of return, a higher ROI for you,
Mhm.
your clients, and also for potential clients that they might refer to you.
Yeah.
You're looking at the long term, as you mentioned.
Yeah. No, and that's part of our success has been that we have very long-standing engagements that are, running well into their second decade. And we have several of those. So that is the successful byproduct of taking that disciplined approach, and that really delivers effective results for them and actually solves problems.
That's beautiful. It's also interesting within your business model, you're working across various locations, as I mentioned, airports, pharmaceutical plants, governmental facilities, Fortune 50 companies, corporate headquarters, very different threat environments. What do you believe is the shift or security risk that you keep seeing gets underestimated by security directors and facility managers as of now?
Um, I don't think it's an underestimation. It might be a bit of an unconventional answer, but I think a lot of times people are well aware of their environments and the risks they face. I think the risk that doesn't get solved a lot of times is the risk of financial risk of funding,
Hmm.
and how to appropriately fund a security program. And so that would be one aspect. If I were to pick another, it would be sort of the life cycle management of the security portfolio that they have under their purview. It's just so large. There's really not a good industry solution out there yet, or approach with which you can actually proactively manage your life cycle and assets. And I've spoken about it, pretty passionately over the years, that there's a gap in the industry of, I have made millions of dollars worth of investment. How do I proactively manage that and not be
Right.
reactive to it? So I think that's would be one risk, that definitely. And again, it's not a lack of, like, people are not aware of it, but it's just how to approach it. It requires a certain level of organization, a certain level of process driven approach to that. I think AI and some of the AI enabled tools and dashboards, those things have made it easier now. So that's one. And then the second one that's not in security's control, it's somewhat in control, but not completely, is sort of the funding risk. I want to do XYZ in a certain amount of time. How do I get funding for it? And how do I, create the right business drivers within my organization to be able to convince them to adapt this part or this aspect of a security program. So I think those two would be sort of top of my list, that we see as gaps, not necessarily gaps as a result of lack of visibility or awareness, but gaps as a result of just the nature of security, industry and organization at large.
Now, touching on the financial aspect for a moment, do you believe it's more so along the fact that they don't have the funding, they don't want to get the funding, or is it that they don't really see the rate of return that they would get or the value within actually implementing these corrections within their organizations?
Not an image problem, but sort of a messaging of what security is, that it's a cost center, that, it's needed when something happens, it's reactive, and that it doesn't generate value.
Mhm.
And I think that that perception then combines with the issue of, okay, I'm going to give funding to do your day to day, but where does the long term sort of value generation of security lie? So now I can give you funding so you can actually do things that are proactive or things that are intelligence based. And this is not across every single organization, but I think that tends to be the biggest financial gap. That there's if you ask somebody, if somebody asks me out in the street, what do I do? And I say I'm in security. They don't understand. The first thought process is not physical security or consulting, right? They're going to think it's, oh, you do cybersecurity, or you do financial securities, oh, it's security guards. There's an iterative approach to their level of understanding what security is, and it never gets there. I always have to explain
Mhm.
what is it that I do. Whereas, if I ever said I'm a private banker or an investment or I do IT, or even though IT is so broad, you mentioned IT, nobody asks this follow-up question. Oh, okay, you're in some level of IT. So I think the security has basically a problem of understanding within the larger community. And that kind of seeps into the boardroom as well. So the C-suite sometimes also quite doesn't understand security. And I think from a end user security stakeholder standpoint, um, there is a gap of speaking the language of business, because we're very good at speaking the language of security, where the bad guys are, where the threats are, where the incident level is. All of those things we're pretty good at, but we're not, as an industry, necessarily the best at speaking, translating that into what the language of business is, what the C-suite understands. How does this generate value or provide value for my organization? And each organization is different. So I think that's where some of the financial hurdles come in. Even if you overcome that, they will still say, well, it's still a cost center. I don't have the money to spend on X, Y, Z. So it's always an uphill battle. But I think that the more sophisticated organizations that really look at risk and business drivers and how investment and security would actually solve operational risk, and who are very much aligned with their leadership, have a lot more success with their programs and with getting effective funding for their programs.
Yeah, it's very hard to articulate the scenarios or the outcomes that you provide to your clients for people that don't understand security, as you mentioned, right? How could you actually articulate it in a way that it's understanding to everybody in the room, right? Not just for you and your team, right? It's interesting how you kind of positioned when you explain to people that you do security, they go straight into cybersecurity, right? Given the technological advancements that we've been seeing within this world within the last couple of years, especially with machine learning, all these artificial intelligence, there's a lot of people that a lot of bad apples that have been facilitating these certain models, these certain LLMs to not only penetrate in different organizations, but also harm so many other environments too. You look at public works, like public water. There's so many different ways that people use these different type of LLMs. You're talking about Anthropic. Now there's Claude Code. All this vibe coding. Like, how could you articulate that in a way where it's beneficial for yourself and do it for good, right? You got to think about those aspects. But it's interesting because they think of everything else but physical security. Now, why is that? It could be just the way that they view the physical security world. It could be because the way that physical security is advertised to the general public is not as mainstream as cybersecurity or financial security, all these different types of securities. But whether the less, with all these different advancements going on, you're still going to need physical security. It's never going to go away. Never. even with all these different AIs and LLMs, sure, it can help with the workflow, it can help with the generation of data and just organize the whole company. But in actual reality, having boots on the ground is completely different than actually having these AI agents work for your company, because they can protect yourself and your company on the inside electronically, but you still need people in certain types of environment, especially like airports, pharmaceutical plants, governmental facilities, corporate headquarters. You still need physical people there to actually monitor the day to day.
Yeah, and it's part of the reason why it doesn't get brought up is it's a little bit invisible, right?
Hmm.
I always the technology consulting firm I used to work for, they did IT, AV, and security, and AV always had the hardest time, and but also it was shiny. It was presentations, right? Everybody's invested in that. The CEO all the way down. People sit in a boardroom, in a conference room, they see images on the wall, so they're invested in it, and it's very much out in the open. Whereas security is hidden, right? It's a card reader on a door, it's a security officer that's standing somewhere. As long as nothing is happening, it's kind of an invisible thing. Like no news is good news in the security world. So
Hmm.
I think that's a big part of it. That it's just it doesn't elicit sort of that. Uh, Visualization of some positive images on a screen, or a nice boardroom. It's kind of a back of the office type setup. Now, I would actually flip it where the modern tools that we have available to us, data intelligence, business intelligence, are actually giving security the opportunity to generate value beyond
Hmm.
security, right? So there are organizations that are using them to run operational efficiencies or to create programs where there's a higher level of user experience within their patrons or their visitors or their employees. So I actually think that there is opportunity now that's never been available to us before. So if security practitioners and vendors and manufacturers and consultants and integrators are able to capitalize on that and really take that to the market and be able to say, okay, we're going to use all this data, we're going to use all this uh, enhanced intelligence that now we have at our in our hands to be able to really showcase to leadership, look, security is not just a security officer standing at the door or a card reader. We actually have a lot of tools with which we can help uh, your organization's operations or business in a way that we couldn't do before, or in a way that we couldn't articulate before. I think it was always available, but now we actually can show with numbers and metrics and actual actionable results. Say, okay, this is something we can do. So I think there's more opportunity now to create better business drivers for security.
Regarding the opportunity aspect, based on your experience, especially being the director within your company for 20 years, right? You started from scratch, from nothing. Given the modern technologies that we have, do you have certain type of programs, workflows, LLMs that would be beneficial for security companies within the next 12 and 24 months that they should implement within their workflows, allow these physical security boots on the ground individuals have a better chance of communicating, logging data, dispatching systems, all that stuff? Do you feel that there's certain stuff that should be looked at and certain areas that should not be looked at?
Yeah, I definitely think that LLMs and data integration models are really, really should be high on the list because they create a lot of opportunity to create metrics and to create workflows and processes that can really improve your operations. AI is a slippery word. It's a buzzword. It's everywhere. So I don't want to um, have an over reliance on it that you just put an AI on a widget or a device and all of a sudden it's going to do
Mhm.
magic, because there is a lot of change control. There's a lot of change management that's required. So it's not as simple, but I actually see more opportunity in all the data that we collect within the security world to be able to operationalize that and really use that very effectively from where security staff sits to workflows and to traffic flows and movements to generating value for non-security businesses within your organization. Sharing that metadata along with different things, creating better metrics for your organization. So I think that that's a low hanging fruit. It's available and it can be operationalized very fast. I think AI does offer or AI enabled, technologies do offer a better security environment, but I think you have to plan it very carefully. There can be tendency to just rely on technology to say, okay, it's going to solve problem X, Y, Z, but how does it impact the management administration of it, the life cycle management, which I think, as I brought up, is a bit of a blind spot in our industry. So how do we proactively manage that, so that these things are not giving us information that's unreliable, or giving us information that's leading us down a path that doesn't exist. And that has happened. There's examples of that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but there is, and that's why, to me, the data intelligence part is even more important, because you want to examine, you want to audit, you want to review to make sure that what your systems and processes and workflows are doing are actually solving operational risk. That's where it all comes down to. Uh, am I mitigating the identified risks that my organization is exposed to or not? And if it's not, then all the AI that you're implementing doesn't do anything. Or if you're not using any technology, whichever way it is, but that's what you want to be looking at.
Yes, it's just having the proper knowledge base, the proper data sets to actually make a viable solution. As Ronald Reagan once said, I'm a big proponent of this, you got to trust but verify. And I love how you mentioned that AI is a buzzword now. I do agree. With all the different LLMs that we have now, all these different codings we have on their back end, this information, these types of terminologies, besides AI, like all the different processes, has been here for decades. It's just machine learning at the end of the day, but people correlated it with AI and artificial
Yeah,
intelligence
exactly. Yeah.
to make it seem like it's a shiny object,
Right.
right? But in reality, sure, yeah, there are different AI agents now that can help run the facilities 24/7. Sure, yeah, that is a thing that's nowadays very, very easy and prominent to actually facilitate within your organization. But going and touching on what you said about having the proper data points, the proper metrics, the proper knowledge base, as I mentioned, you got to have those problem areas facilitated before you do it, because there's so many people, not only in a business sense, but in a personal sense as well, using all these different AI tools
Hmm.
that just trust it without verifying, right?
Hmm.
They depend
Yeah.
too much on it.
Right.
Right, there's a difference between, and don't get me wrong, as a business development, using AI is excellent.
Yeah.
It's very practical to use it, but it's from how are you using it? How are you honing those skills? Is it actually factual, or are you just using it to use it as a shiny object? There's so many people that come to me like, "Oh, I want this, I want this." Like, do you really need that, or do you want it? There's a difference between needing and wanting. Like,
Right.
what's actually a problem within your organization that these type of solutions can provide?
Right.
You see so many people nowadays that just make all these different tools within 5 minutes, going on AI for like 5 minutes and sell it for like $1,000. Like, you're
Hmm.
not really putting the work, the effort to actually understand the business. As
Right.
we mentioned before about those cookie cutter facilities, those softwares, it's a completely different approach than what you're doing, even though what you're doing is more of like truly understanding the company, doing more custom stuff. It does take more time, more touch points, more interactions. But as you mentioned, that's more long term. If you just sold something like all these other SaaS companies are for security, sure, you may make a quick buck, a quick win here and there. But how exactly are you providing real trust, real
Yep.
rapport building, right? Going back to the clients week by week, month by month. As you mentioned, you have clients that have been with you for 2 decades, right? There's a reason why those clients
Mhm.
are with you
Yep.
as opposed to other organizations, because they truly see the value that you and your team bring to their organization.
Right.
And that's something that some people miss, especially when they start growing. And especially as the company is growing year by year, they kind of forget the outcome, the mission, the value that they bring to other people. But it's good that you're still kind of in those lens, understanding what exactly and why you started it, and what exactly are you actually facilitating within these different types of corporations and environments. I've had, since starting this podcast, I've had a multiple different CEOs, founders, operators come onto this, and there's different challenges within different organizations, but there's similar challenges that sort of slow down the growth, and it kind of boils down to a couple key areas. You're talking about sales, lead gen, fulfillment, and delivery. You've been within your organization building it for 20 years. You celebrated 20 years a couple days ago. That's beautiful to hear. There's so many people nowadays that start a business and it doesn't fall through. Or it doesn't go the way they want to go. It's just very hard to actually pivot or push, right? From like a business perspective, what's one area that you're looking to fix within your company in 2026, whether that's client acquisition, project delivery, scaling the practice without losing that like customization aspect in the consulting piece?
Yeah, I think the industry is evolving, and I actually will be speaking about it at IC West in a couple of weeks. I think the industry is evolving, and with that, there is, consulting is similar. You want to avoid being commoditized, or you want to be avoid being in an area where, that service is turning into a commodity. And I think part of the evolution within the consulting sphere is how do you generate a recurring revenue model that helps you, kind of not just sustain, but helps you really kind of create a steady stream of revenue, but also a steady stream of engagement with your customers. So we're very, very focused on that right now. So that's, each iteration of the last 20 years has been some sort of an evolution one way or another, whether it was expansion of services into risk and program management and project management, or some sort of a, geographical diversity. But I think one of the areas that we're really focused on is what does that look like in the consulting world? And there are fellow peers and friends of mine in the industry that are also thinking along the same lines, is that we need to pivot to some sort of a cadence and some sort of an opportunity where we're able to provide services that are long term and sustained and not a project to project sort of revenue model, which has been kind of the traditional way of security consulting in the US. So
Hmm.
that's really kind of where our focus is, and that's professional services, that's lifecycle management support, that's program management support, this portfolio management. So there's a lot of aspects to that, and that's kind of what we've been focused on for the last 3 to 4 years, and we're seeing success in that. It's something that's becoming more and more requested. It's something that's becoming more engagement around that, especially in the last couple of years. There's been a lot of traction there. So that's kind of where our next evolution sits. So that's kind of where we're focused on and headed.
That's awesome. Just taking the opportunity from other clients and kind of expanding that, building your other pipelines for client acquisition. That's beautiful. There's so many people that focus on their core offers and they don't expand. There's so many people that stop prospecting, stop getting those client acquisitions, building their pipelines. Once they have a solid base of clientele, they're really honed in on their services. But I mean, given what you're doing, it's beautiful because it truly shows that you're still trying to evolve the business, right? Even though you've been in this organization, this field for 20 years, that doesn't mean you're not evolving or trying to
Oh,
expand.
you
There's
have
so
to.
many
Yeah.
people that, yeah, exactly. There's so many people that just get comfortable.
Right.
Not just in a personal development,
Right.
but like in a professional
Right.
development. The only way you truly grow is to start something you're uncomfortable with.
Yep.
Even when you first started this 3, 4 years ago, these different types of managements, sure, you may not know what you were doing in the beginning, but as you kept on going back to the drawing board week after week, month after month, some things were slowly rolling the ball to a point where like, okay, I can offer this confidently, I can offer this area confidently. 10 people said they wanted this within their organization. So it's like just understanding those opportunities, taking it from the get-go and actually facilitating those tasks instead of actually saying, "Yeah, I'll get around to it."
Mhm.
The thing that differentiates people from actually running a business is not thinking of what you can do, is actually being action oriented. And that's the difference between successful and unsuccessful people. They think too much, they don't believe in themselves, or they want it to be picture perfect before they do these different go to market strategies. But there's a difference between having it perfect and actually rolling with it. Because once you start rolling with it, you can see what actually may not be beneficial, what pinholes are in what process. That's how you fix it. You just got to keep on doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard also, right? I can see the other side where if you're really good at something and you have a niche, it is a comfortable place. And I think even there, if you're able to grow that, or if you're able to have a good client base, because there's a lot of ways to grow a business, right? You could be in a niche, but then you can find different types of customers in it.
Mhm.
So it is hard. I see the comfort level that people have, and I always appreciate that because it's something you do well, and to get outside of that sphere can be a little intimidating. And so yeah, so there's a certain level of risk tolerance and certain level of risk aversion that exists definitely. And security tends to be risk averse by nature,
Mhm.
so it's not easy.
It just depends on exactly what the company is looking for, what
Yeah,
exactly are they trying to
right.
provide to all these clients. I mean, given again with you, you started your business as a design tech implementation, but then you pivoted
Yeah,
into
right.
actually doing the consulting
Yeah.
piece.
So with each of those, we get more comfortable with taking, a new risk or trying a new venture out, and that's kind of how our evolution came about.
Mhm, mhm. W Before we wrap up here, if you can go back and give yourself one piece of advice when you first started your business back in 2006, knowing what you know now about building a business, about how the best time would be to pivot, what would you tell yourself when you first started?
Well, that's a difficult question. There's a lot of different things that play into it, and I think the one thing would be kind of how you set up sort of goals and objectives. You do tend to be get too bogged down in the day to day minutia,
Mhm,
especially in this business. We're a very, very small company. Others are equally small companies. So it's very easy to lose sight of the forest for the tree. And so, I think that setting up that type of a uh, faraway outlook is very important in the beginning, and to move towards that goal strategically is very important. So it can be very easy, and yeah, I think all of us fall into that trap a little bit, where we certainly did at times, where you're just okay, the work is coming, the business is happening. I got to focus on the next 3 months and the 6 months, or cash flow or invoices or whatever is going on, because you're wearing so many different hats and you're working 24/7 to kind of keep things moving along and running. And sometimes, not sometimes, it is very easy to just kind of lose sight of where you're trying to head. What are your goals and objectives, as opposed to just this is what I do and I'm just going to kind of keep doing that. So, if I were to go back and say, um, you know, how and we've done that, but I would do it in different ways. I would do it and try different approaches from the beginning, and some of the approaches we tried to have success, some of the approaches we had to revisit, some didn't work. That's the nature of business. But that'd be the one thing that I would also give as advice, is that don't lose sight of the objectives, long-term objectives and goals of your organization, because it's very easy to do in small companies like ourselves that don't sell a product, because that's the key, because our product is our time. So what
mhm.
that does is that you are then constantly, you are the product. And so then you don't realize that you have to step back from it. Because if you're just selling a camera, right? You're a little bit removed from the camera. You're not the camera itself. And then you can say, okay, the camera is selling kind of itself. I have my sales team. I have all those things. But now where do I want it to be? When you're the product, how do you evolve yourself into a better product? And so that's why it's very easy to fall into that trap of, I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm going to focus on the next project. I'm going to focus on the next deliverable or the next assignment, and not realize that you have to evolve the product. You have to evolve yourself. You have to refresh yourself. And so that would be the one thing that I would focus on.
It's very interesting that you mentioned about evolving yourself, because when people think of a company, they really only think about like the product base, right?
Mhm.
But you are the product
Mhm.
at the end of the day. So it's
Yeah.
like, how could you evolve yourself? And the
Yep.
only way to do that is just keep on doing it every single day, having as much conversations, bringing qualified prospects within your pipeline that transition into actually being a sold client. But I do agree about where you should position your energy. There's so many people, especially entrepreneurs that start out, they think that having all this busy work is actually being productive. But just because you have busy work doesn't mean you're actually being productive within
Mhm.
your business.
Right.
Sure, you can watch, you can study, read books about how to position your different business models that you have within your organization. But if you really just keep on doing that and not going out prospecting, talking to people, going to different networking events, shaking hands, kissing babies, what exactly are you really doing within your business? You tell people you think you're actually evolving the business, but what you're actually doing is just hiding yourself and procrastinating from busy work, and you think that translates into actually doing promising work, but it's not. It's two different sides of the coin.
Yeah.
Either you can go out and fall on your face 10 times, or you can be at home researching, studying, reading all these books, listening to all these different mentors, and not doing anything with that knowledge. That
Yeah.
separates the action oriented people from the thought process people, as we kind of touched on earlier in this conversation. It just
Yeah.
lies on like who you are as a person and who you want how you want the business to actually become within your field.
Yeah, I think role appropriate tasks and responsibilities are very, very critical in any organization. I mean, that's part of what we do is governance. We do a lot of governance work for our end users, and it's very important. But a lot of consultants tend to lose sight of that governance in their own organization.
Mhm.
So that's a really important thing to keep an eye out on.
For anyone who's listening or watching this, what's the best place for them either to reach out to you or Atriod?
The LinkedIn page, we have a lot of resources there. So obviously, check out our LinkedIn page. Also, the website. There's a way to contact us from there as well. But the website has all the information of what we do and the things that we do in thought leadership and industry. So both of those ways are pretty good.
All right, awesome, Mohammed. Well, I really appreciate your time and coming on to the show.
No, no, this is fun. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, it was a good time. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.